You mentioned a lack of overall studies, or a lot more have to be done. Have there been studies on the health effects of wireless radiation, and what was the difference in the results between the industry and non-industry funded studies? And what have the most recent large-scale studies on wireless radiation's effect on human health determined? Were the findings widely shared with the public and the media?
It turns out there's a preponderance of research that was privately funded that show clear evidence of linkage, a preponderance. There's no debate in the science world that there's a link between many, many illnesses and problems we have with our body from the research side where there's been unfunded. Not surprising when you look at the funding associated with studies that were funded by the service providers, there's none. This is historic. This is not unique to the industry. My brother took a court to federal court level where there were 10, he was interviewing 10 of the most prominent individuals on L-tryptophan. He's talking to him and he asked him a question, and all of a sudden my brother realized this guy was on the payroll of the manufacturer who was producing the L-tryptophan. Long story short, he won his case because it was clear that that industry was influencing the marketplace through some of the world's experts, and it was in their favor that they were influenced. By the way, in the US, there hasn't been funding for study on RF signals for 30 years. It was all pulled out. It's amazing that where we were the lead in research and science in this space, we have none. So, National Toxicity Program, a division of the federal government, initiated a study 7, 8 years ago. And it was an epidemiology study. And they intended to prove that there was no link. So what they did was they had very, very large populations of exposures, and exposures, totally no exposures to other populations. The importance of it was the populations were large enough where you could draw with statistical significance the results and their validity. In other words, I can say with 95% confidence that the results of this study clearly indicate a condition created in the study. This study with the NTP, the guys who did it, the researchers who did it, they were really, really, really smart because, as I mentioned before, the standards were based on the thermal impact. They moved the transmitters away from the epidemiology groups where thermal was removed. And the only evidence they would have is the biological. So they go $25 million being spent over several years, and the reports come out. There's a significant set of data that says there's frontal lobe cancer or tumor of the frontal lobe and to the heart, which I was actually surprised about. That was one of those things that I'm a subject matter expert to some extent, and I didn't predict that. So here we now have statistically significant data in epidemiology, which is always the leader in science and research, has been since the year of the flood. And there's now evidence that there's direct links. Believe it or not, there was the Ramazzani Institute out of Italy that did the same thing more recently. You know what? They had the same results. They had statistically significant confirmation of the NTP. And is frontal lobe, and it's the heart. Now, by the way, over the last 10 years, frontal lobe cancer, where the links to cancer are from use of cell phone, have grown 2% every year for 10 years. So the data of the world's use sort of matches what they found. And of course, Cochrane, O.J. Simpson case, frontal lobe cancer. McCain just passed away from cancer from use of cell phone. Biden's son, same difference. So we're seeing more and more evidence of frontal lobe. And by the way, cell phone doesn't affect other parts of the brain. It influences the brain, which is a really problematic in and of itself. But where you look for linkage to cancers, there are direct links in these recent studies.
Does long-term use of cell phones have any impact on memory?
Long-term use of cell phones is sort of an important point. After 10 years of use, it's typically suggested, based on study work we have, that you're 3 more times likely to get serious, if not cancer, of the brain. It multiplies by 3. We know that there are these hard facts about serious problems, and that's certainly important to understand. We also know, when I used to do study work for the Bell system, I used to look for crosstalk. Crosstalk is interference from one system to another. And I used to look at the crosstalk from an electronic device to another electronic device. Well, it turns out a cell phone is an electronic device, and so is your brain. And so there's this crosstalk interference to the frontal lobe for anger, emotions, ADHD, all these kinds of things that we know are growing quickly as problems in our society. And there's more and more growing evidence that the cell phones are potentially leading that, as well as the ambient of the RF from Wi-Fis and laptops influencing the behavior driven by the brain.